The bitter December wind howled across the Colorado plains as Zachary Morgan huddled deeper into his sheepskin coat, his calloused fingers fumbling with the latch on his cabin door. The year was 1879, and winter had descended upon the frontier with merciless fury, turning the normally golden landscape into a white, frozen wasteland. Reed McAllister pulled his worn Stetson lower over his eyes, squinting through the swirling snow toward his isolated homestead. 5 years he'd been out here, alone with his thoughts and the occasional company of his horses and cattle. 5 years since he'd left behind the bustle of Denver to stake his claim on this patch of rugged beauty near the foothills. The locals in the nearest town a half-day's ride away had taken to calling him the Hermit of Elkhorn Ridge, and he'd done little to discourage the nickname. His ranch was modest but functional, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a small stable attached, surrounded by enough grazing land to support his small herd. It wasn't much compared to some of the sprawling cattle empires further south, but it was his, paid for with the gold he'd painstakingly panned from mountain streams and years of backbreaking work. As Reed approached the cabin, the snow falling heavier now, he noticed something unusual. Footprints, small ones, led to his front door. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he dismounted, tying his gelding to the porch post. "Hello," he called out, voice rough from disuse. No response came except the mournful wail of the wind. The footprints were fresh, no more than an hour old. Reed followed them, tension building in his shoulders as he reached his own door. No signs of forced entry, but something was definitely amiss. Drawing his Colt, he slowly pushed the door open. What he found inside was the last thing he expected. Huddled by his cold stove was a woman. She was thin, too thin, with dark hair hanging in tangles around a face smudged with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Her clothes were little more than rags, torn and patched repeatedly, wholly inadequate for the Colorado winter. She startled at his entrance, pressing herself against the wall, eyes wide with fear. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The door was unlocked. I just needed shelter from the storm." Reed lowered his gun slowly, holstering it as he took in the sight before him. She couldn't have been more than 25, though hardship had etched lines around her eyes that made her seem older. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "You're half frozen," he said finally, moving toward the stove. "Let me get a fire going." He worked silently, aware of her wary gaze following his every move. Soon, the fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Reed hung his coat on a peg by the door and removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "I'm Reed McAllister," he said, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her further. "This is my place." The woman remained silent for a long moment, as if weighing whether to speak at all. "Zara," she finally offered. "Zara Holloway." Reed nodded, respecting her caution. "You're welcome to warm yourself, Miss Holloway. I'll fix something to eat." He moved to the small pantry, pulling out salt pork, beans, and the last of his cornmeal. As he worked, he stole glances at his unexpected guest. She had relaxed slightly as the warmth from the stove began to fill the cabin, but she remained vigilant, her posture suggesting she was ready to bolt at any moment. "Are you running from something, Miss Holloway?" Reed asked quietly as he set the pan on the stove. Her eyes flashed with alarm. "Why would you ask that? Most folks don't wander these parts alone, especially not in winter. And forgive my directness, but you look like you've had a rough time of it." Zara's fingers twisted nervously in the frayed fabric of her skirt. "I suppose I am, in a way," she admitted after a long pause. "But I'm not a criminal, if that's what you're asking." Reed nodded. "That's good enough for me. For now, at least. They ate in silence beans and cornbread washed down with hot coffee. Reed noticed how Zara ate carefully, clearly trying not to appear too ravenous despite her obvious hunger. When she'd finished, he cleared the plates and returned to find her struggling to keep her eyes open. "There's a bed through that door," Reed said, gesturing to the small second room. "It's not much, but it's clean. I'll take the chair here by the fire." Zara looked at him with undisguised suspicion. "Why are you helping me?" Reed considered the question seriously. "Out here, you don't turn folks away in a storm. That's a death sentence." He paused, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "Besides, I've been alone a long time. Having someone to cook for makes a nice change." A ghost of a smile flitted across her face, the first he'd seen before disappearing behind her careful mask. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister." "Reed," he corrected. "Just Reed is fine." Zara nodded and rose stiffly, making her way to the small bedroom. At the doorway, she paused, turning back to him with a question in her eyes. Reed understood her unspoken concern. "The key's on the inside," he said simply. "Lock it if it makes you feel safer." Relief washed over her features. "Thank you, Reed." The door closed behind her, and moments later, Reed heard the soft click of the lock. He settled into his chair by the fire, pondering the strange turn his day had taken. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but for the first time in years, his cabin didn't feel quite so empty. Morning arrived with brilliant clarity, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Reed was already up, tending to his animals in the stable, when Zara emerged from the bedroom. She had attempted to straighten her appearance, washing her face and hands with water from the pitcher and combing her fingers through her tangled hair. "Good morning," she said cautiously, hovering by the doorway. Reed looked up from the coffee he was brewing. "Morning. Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you," he nodded, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Storm's passed, but there's 4 feet of snow out there. You won't be going anywhere for a few days, I reckon." A flash of something fear, crossed Zara's face. "I don't want to impose, it's not an imposition," Reed interrupted. "Like I said, company makes a nice change." He handed her a cup. "Hungry?" Over a breakfast of biscuits and bacon, Reed watched as Zara gradually relaxed. The food and rest had done her good. Color was returning to her cheeks, revealing a natural beauty that hardship had temporarily masked. "Those clothes won't do," Reed said suddenly, causing Zara to look up in surprise. "I've got some things that might work until we can get you proper attire." He disappeared into his bedroom, returning with a flannel shirt, woolen trousers, thick socks, and a belt. "They'll be too big, but they're warm." Zara stared at the offering, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. Thank you. There's a wash basin and some soap in the bedroom. Take your time." "I'll be outside tending to the stock." Reed spent the morning clearing paths to the stable and chopping more firewood, purposely giving Zara space and privacy. When he returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, he found her standing by the window in his clothes, her hair damp from washing. The transformation was remarkable. Without the grime and in clean, if oversized clothing, Zara's true appearance emerged. Her hair, when clean, was a rich chestnut brown that fell in waves past her shoulders. Her eyes, which he now saw clearly for the first time, were a striking green, bright against her fair skin. "Feel better?" he asked, hanging his coat. "Like a new person," she said, offering a genuine smile that transformed her face. "I can't thank you enough." Reed felt something stir within him, an unfamiliar warmth he hadn't experienced in years. He quickly tamped it down. "No need for thanks. Anyone would do the same." "No," Zara said softly. "Not anyone." The days that followed fell into a simple rhythm. The snow kept them mostly confined to the cabin. though Reed made daily trips to the stable to care for his horse and the 2 milk cows he kept. Zara insisted on helping with cooking and chores, clearly determined not to be a burden. On the 3rd evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Reed finally broached the subject they'd been dancing around. "Where were you headed when the storm caught you?" Zara stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Nowhere in particular, just away." "From what?" She sighed, drawing her knees up to her chest. "My husband." Reed tensed. "You're married, widowed," she corrected, her voice flat. "Or at least, I hope so by now." The implication of her words hung heavy in the air. "He was a violent man," Zara continued, speaking more to the fire than to Reed. "I married Thomas when I was 17. My parents had died, and he seemed kind at first, a successful businessman from Pueblo. But once the ring was on my finger—" She trailed off, unconsciously rubbing her wrist where Reed now noticed a fading bruise. "He controlled everything, what I wore, who I spoke to, when I could leave the house. The beating started about a month after the wedding." Reed's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "3 weeks ago he came home in a rage. I don't even remember what set him off. He beat me worse than ever before. I thought he would kill me. Maybe he thought he had." Zara's voice wavered. "When he finally passed out drunk, I took what little money I could find and ran. I've been moving ever since, afraid to stay in one place too long." "You think he's looking for you?" Zara nodded. "Thomas is a proud man. He won't accept that I left him. In his mind, I'm his property." She finally looked at Reed. "I understand if you want me to leave. I've put you in danger just by being here." Reed considered her words carefully. "This Thomas, what's his full name?" "Thomas Grayson. He owns the mercantile in Pueblo and has investments in the mines." Reed knew the name. Most people in Colorado did. Thomas Grayson was indeed a successful businessman, but he was also known for his temper and ruthlessness in business dealings. "He won't find you here," Reed said finally. "Not many folks even know I exist, and those that do don't come calling, especially in winter." Hope flickered in Zara's eyes. "You'd let me stay?" Reed surprised himself with his next words. "As long as you need." That night, as Reed lay on his makeshift bed by the fire, he questioned his own decision. He deliberately isolated himself for years, avoiding entanglements and complications. Now he'd invited both into his home. But as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The days stretched into weeks, and January settled heavily upon the Colorado wilderness. The temperature dropped further, but inside Reed's cabin, something was warming. With each passing day, Zara's fear receded a little more, replaced by a cautious optimism. She spoke more freely, even laughed occasionally, a sound that Reed found himself craving. One evening, as a particularly fierce blizzard raged outside, Reed returned from the stable to find Zara at the small table, bent over something. "What are you working on?" he asked, hanging his coat. Zara looked up, slightly embarrassed. "I found some paper and a pencil. I hope you don't mind." Reed moved closer, peering over her shoulder. On the paper was a remarkably detailed sketch of the view from his cabin window, the snow-covered hills, the line of pines in the distance, even the weathered fence post with a raven perched atop it. "You're talented," he said, genuinely impressed. Zara blushed. "I used to draw all the time as a girl. Thomas, he didn't approve, said it was a waste of time." Reed frowned. "Seems to me a man who can't appreciate beauty isn't worth much himself." Their eyes met briefly before Zara looked away. "I've been thinking," she said, changing the subject. "I need to earn my keep here. I can't just continue taking your charity." "It's not charity," Reed protested. "Nevertheless, I want to contribute." She gestured to the sketch. "Perhaps when the weather clears we could ride into town." I could see about selling some drawings, maybe find other work. Reed hadn't been to town in over a month, but he recognized her need for independence. That's fair. First good day, we'll make the trip. That opportunity came a week later, when the skies cleared and the temperature rose enough to make travel possible. Reed saddled his gelding, mounting up before helping Zara climb on behind him. The sensation of her arms around his waist as they rode created a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun. Elkhorn, the nearest settlement, was a small but growing town consisting of a main street with the essential businesses: general store, blacksmith, saloon, hotel, and a small church. Reed rarely visited except for supplies, and he felt the curious stares as he rode in with a woman. They dismounted in front of the general store, and Reed tied the horse to the hitching post. "I need to see about feed and supplies. You coming in?" Zara nodded, self-consciously adjusting the 2 large coat Reed had lent her. As they entered, the storekeeper, a portly man named Wilson, looked up in surprise. McAllister, twice in one winter must be some kind of record. His curious gaze shifted to Zara. And who might this be? Before Reed could answer, the door opened again and a woman in her 50s entered, carrying a basket. "Mrs. Thornton," Wilson greeted. "Perfect timing. I just got those fabric samples you ordered." The woman, clearly the wife of someone important in town, judging by her fine clothes, approached the counter but stopped when she noticed Zara. Her eyes narrowed with interest. "I don't believe we've met," she said. "I'm Margaret Thornton, the doctor's wife." Zara hesitated before responding. "Zara Holloway. It's a pleasure, madam." Mrs. Thornton's gaze took in Zara's oversized men's clothing and Reed's protective stance beside her. "Are you new to our little community, Miss Holloway?" "Mrs. Thornton is our unofficial town welcoming committee," Wilson interjected with a chuckle. "Knows everything about everyone." "I'm just passing through," Zara said carefully. "Mr. McAllister has kindly offered me shelter during the bad weather." Understanding and something like disapproval flashed in Mrs. Thornton's eyes. Reed bristled, recognizing the unspoken judgment. "Miss Holloway is a talented artist," he said, his voice firmer than necessary. "In fact, we're wondering if there might be interest in purchasing some of her work locally." This caught Mrs. Thornton's attention. "An artist? How interesting. What sort of work do you do?" Zara reached into the satchel she carried, pulling out several of the sketches she'd made over the past week's landscapes mostly, but also a remarkably lifelike portrait of Reed that he hadn't even known she'd drawn. Mrs. Thornton examined them with genuine interest. "These are quite good," she admitted, surprise evident in her voice. "You know, the new hotel is looking for artwork for their rooms and dining area. The owner, Mr. Simmons, is a friend of ours. I could mention your work to him." Hope brightened Zara's face. "That would be very kind, thank you." The older woman's demeanor softened slightly. "Well, we must support the arts, even out here in the wilderness. Come by our home tomorrow, the big white house at the end of Church Street. We'll have tea, and I'll invite Mr. Simmons to join us." After Mrs. Thornton departed with her purchases, Wilson leaned across the counter. "Don't mind her prying. Town this size, a new face is big news." He lowered his voice. "Especially one staying with our resident hermit." Reed ignored the comment. "We need supplies, Wilson. And something proper for Miss Holloway to wear." By the time they left the store, Reed had spent more money than he'd planned, but Zara now had 2 dresses, undergarments, a proper coat, and boots that actually fit. They stored everything in the saddlebags, then headed to the saloon for a hot meal before the ride home. The Lucky Strike saloon was relatively quiet in the afternoon. A few men played cards in the corner, and the bartender nodded at Reed as they entered. "McAllister, been a while. Frank." Reed nodded back. 2 meals and coffee if you're serving. They found a table in the corner away from the other patrons. Zara looked uncomfortable, clearly aware that respectable women didn't typically frequent saloons. "We can eat elsewhere if you prefer," Reed offered. "No, it's fine, just not what I'm used to." Frank's wife, Clara, brought over plates of beef stew and bread along with steaming mugs of coffee. She gave Zara a friendly smile. "Nice to see Reed with company for a change. He usually just grunts, pays, and leaves." Reed rolled his eyes. "Thank you, Clara." As they ate, Reed noticed Zara repeatedly glancing at a man sitting alone at the bar, reading a newspaper. He was well dressed with a city cut to his clothes. "Something wrong?" Reed asked quietly. Zara shook her head. "No, just, he reminds me of the men Thomas did business with." She attempted a smile. "Old habits die hard, I suppose. Always watching, always wary." Reed understood. "It won't always be that way, won't it?" Doubt clouded her features. "Sometimes I think I'll never feel truly safe again." Reed reached across the table, surprising them both by covering her hand with his. "You're safe with me. I promise you that." The intensity in his voice caused Zara to look up sharply. Something passed between them, an unspoken connection that neither was ready to acknowledge. The moment was broken when the saloon doors burst open, and a group of cowboys entered, laughing and stomping snow from their boots. Reed withdrew his hand, and they finished their meal in companionable silence. On the ride back to the cabin, Zara held tighter to Reed than was strictly necessary, and he found himself hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched. The landscape around them was blindingly white and beautiful, but Reed's thoughts were elsewhere, on the woman behind him, and the unfamiliar feeling stirring in his chest. The following day, Reed took Zara into town for her meeting with Mrs. Thornton. He waited outside, uncomfortable with the prospect of tea and social niceties, while Zara presented her artwork to the hotel owner. When she emerged 2 hours later, her face was flushed with excitement. "Mr. Simmons wants 20 pieces," she announced as they mounted up. "Landscapes, wildlife, and scenes of town life. He's paying $5 each." Reed whistled low. "That's a fair price." "More than fair," Zara agreed. "And Mrs. Thornton mentioned that several of her friends might be interested in portraits." Her smile faded slightly. "I told them I'm a widow from Kansas. I hope that was all right." "It's smart," Reed assured her. "Keeps things simple." As they rode home, a comfortable silence fell between them. Reed found himself thinking about the future, something he hadn't done in years. Before Zara's arrival, his days had stretched before him in predictable sameness. Now, everything felt uncertain, yet strangely full of possibility. February brought milder weather, and with it, a shift in the dynamic between Reed and Zara. She rode into town twice a week, delivering completed artworks and accepting new commissions. With her earnings, she insisted on contributing to the household expenses and bought fabric to sew proper curtains for the cabin windows. The small space that had once been merely functional began to transform. Zara's sketches adorned the walls, colorful quilts brightened the chairs, and flowers she'd pressed last autumn were arranged in frames on the table. More significant than these physical changes was the way laughter now filled the room, something that had been absent for far too long. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Reed found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the war, the gold claim that had given him enough to buy his land. "Why did you choose such an isolated spot?" Zara asked, curious. "You clearly know how to get along with people when you want to." Reed poked at the fire, watching the sparks rise. "After the war, I couldn't stomach crowds or noise, too many memories." He paused. I served with the Union cavalry, saw things no man should see, did things. He trailed off. Zara waited, not pressing. When it was over, I just wanted peace, Reed continued finally. Came west looking for empty spaces. Found this land and knew it was where I belonged. Do you ever get lonely? The question was soft, hesitant. Reed looked at her then, really looked at her, taking in the gentle curves of her face illuminated by firelight. I didn't think so. Not until recently. Color rose in Zara's cheeks and she looked away. I should go to bed. Early start tomorrow if I'm to finish Mr. Simmons' commission. Reed nodded, watching as she retreated to the bedroom that had become hers by unspoken agreement, while he continued to sleep by the fire. As the door closed behind her, he exhaled slowly, acknowledging to himself what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Zara Holloway. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it settled in his chest like a warm coal, both comforting and dangerous. March arrived with the first tentative signs of spring. The snow began to recede, revealing patches of muddy earth beneath. The days grew longer, and Reed busied himself with preparations for planting and repairs to fences damaged by winter storms. Zara had become a familiar sight in Elkhorn, her artistic talents earning her respect and a modest income. Mrs. Thornton had taken her under her wing, introducing her to the small society of the growing town. Though she still returned to Reed's cabin each evening, there was a new independence in her manner, a confidence that Reed found both admirable and concerning. One afternoon, as Reed worked on mending a broken corral gate, he heard the sound of hooves approaching. Looking up, he saw Zara returning from town earlier than expected, her expression troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked as she dismounted. Zara hesitated. "There was a man in town asking questions, about a woman matching my description." Reed felt his body tense. "Grayson? No, not Thomas. One of his men, I think. I recognized him from Pueblo." She twisted her hands anxiously. "Mrs. Thornton told me after he'd gone. He claimed to be my brother, looking for his missing sister." Reed set down his tools. "Did anyone tell him about you?" "I don't think so. Mrs. Thornton was suspicious of him, said he didn't seem very brotherly." Zara's voice shook slightly. "But Reed, if they've traced me this far—" "They won't find you," Reed said firmly. "And if they do, they'll have to go through me first." Zara's eyes widened. "No, I won't have you putting yourself in danger for me. Thomas is. He's dangerous, Reed. He has connections, money. He's killed before, I'm certain of it." Reed stepped closer, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Zara, listen to me. I've faced worse than men like Thomas Grayson. I'm not afraid of him." "But I am," she whispered. "I'm afraid of what he'll do to you. I'm afraid of losing." She stopped, unable to finish. Reed felt a tightening in his chest. "Losing what? This? Everything we've built here?" Zara looked up at him, vulnerability plain in her eyes. "I can't bear the thought of bringing destruction to your doorstep after all you've done for me." Reed wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms, to promise that nothing would ever harm her again. But he respected her too much to make promises he might not be able to keep. "We'll figure this out," he said instead. "Together." That evening, they developed a plan. Zara would temporarily stop going into town. Reed would make inquiries about the stranger and determine whether he was still in the area. If necessary, they would consider moving further west, perhaps to the Wyoming territory, where Reed had contacts from his prospecting days. As they talked, Reed noticed Zara watching him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "What is it?" he asked finally. "Why are you doing all this for me?" The question was direct, her gaze unwavering. "The truth, Reed." Reed ran a hand through his hair, unaccustomed to articulating his feelings. "At first, it was just common decency. You needed help and I could provide it." And now, Zara pressed. Reed met her gaze. Now I can't imagine this place without you in it. The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with implication. Zara's breath caught, and for a moment, Reed feared he'd said too much. Then she moved toward him, closing the distance until she stood directly before him. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she raised her hand to his cheek. "I can't imagine being anywhere else," she whispered. "I've never felt as safe, as valued as I do with you." Reed covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. The simple gesture broke something open between them, a dam of restraint that had been holding back a flood of emotion. With aching tenderness, Reed drew her closer. "Zara," he murmured, her name a question and an answer all at once. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a testing of waters too important to rush. When they parted, Reed rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed as he savored the moment. "I never expected this," Zara confessed softly. "When I ran from Thomas, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I might find a new beginning." Reed wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as if he could shield her from all the world's harm through sheer force of will. "As long as I'm breathing, you'll have a place here, with me." That night, for the first time, they shared the bedroom, though they did nothing more than hold each other. For both of them, wounded in different ways by life's cruelties, the simple act of trusting enough to sleep in another's arms was intimacy enough. 2 days later, Reed rode into town alone, determined to learn what he could about the man asking questions. At the general store, Wilson confirmed that the stranger had checked out of the hotel and left town heading south. "Odd fellow," Wilson remarked. Asked about new arrivals, especially women traveling alone, said his sister had run off from their farm in Kansas. He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I think he was a bounty hunter or hired gun, had that look about him." Reed maintained a casual demeanor. "Anyone tell him about Zara?" Wilson shook his head. "Don't think so. Mrs. Thornton spread the word that he seemed suspicious." He gave Reed a knowing look. "Town's taken a liking to your lady friend, protective-like." Reed didn't correct Wilson's assumption about his relationship with Zara. In truth, he wasn't sure what to call it himself. What had begun as charity had evolved into friendship, and now it was something deeper, something both exhilarating and terrifying in its intensity. Relieved by Wilson's report, Reed completed his errands and headed home. As he crested the ridge overlooking his property, he slowed his horse, taking in the sight below. Smoke curled from the chimney of his cabin, their cabin now, and he could see Zara hanging laundry on the line, her hair caught by the spring breeze. Something shifted in Reed's heart. For the first time since the war, he felt truly at peace. This was what home was supposed to feel like. He urged his horse forward, eager to share the good news that the stranger had left. But as he approached, he noticed Zara's tense posture. She was staring at something beyond the cabin, her body rigid with fear. Following her gaze, Reed spotted a rider approaching from the east, a well-dressed man on an expensive-looking bay stallion. Even from a distance, Reed knew Thomas Grayson had found them. Reed spurred his horse, racing down the slope toward the cabin. He reached Zara just as the stranger drew near. "Get inside," Reed instructed quietly. "My rifle is above the door." Zara's face had gone pale. "Reed, please go," he insisted, helping her down from his horse. "It'll be all right." As Zara reluctantly retreated to the cabin, Reed turned to face the approaching rider. Thomas Grayson was exactly as Reed had imagined him, expensively dressed, with the arrogant bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. He was older than Reed had expected, perhaps in his 40s, with cold eyes that assessed Reed with open contempt. "You must be McAllister," Grayson called as he reined in his horse. "I've heard about you, the hermit who's harboring my wife." Reed remained mounted, keeping his hand near his holster. "Your wife is dead, as I understand it." Grayson's mouth twisted into an unpleasant smile. "A misunderstanding. Zara has always had a flair for the dramatic." He glanced toward the cabin. "I've come to take her home where she belongs." "She doesn't want to go with you," Reed said evenly. "And she's not going to." Grayson's expression hardened. "You don't want to make an enemy of me, McAllister. I'm an important man in this territory. One word from me and you could lose this pitiful piece of land." Reed laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Your kind of important doesn't mean much out here, Grayson. This is my property and I'm asking you to leave. Not without what's mine." Grayson's hand moved toward his coat, but Reed was faster, drawing his revolver and leveling it at the other man's chest. "I wouldn't," Reed warned. "I was killing men before you were counting your first dollars. Now turn that fancy horse around and ride out." For a tense moment, Grayson seemed to weigh his options. Then, with deliberate slowness, he moved his hand away from his coat. "This isn't over," he said coldly. "No woman makes a fool of Thomas Grayson. She'll come home eventually one way or another." "She is home," Reed replied. "And if I ever see you on my land again, I won't waste time with warnings." Grayson's face flushed with anger, but he recognized the deadly seriousness in Reed's eyes. With a curt nod, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his rigid back radiating fury. Reed watched until Grayson disappeared over the ridge before lowering his gun and dismounting. As he turned toward the cabin, the door flew open and Zara rushed out, the rifle clutched in her trembling hands. "Is he gone?" she asked, scanning the horizon. Reed gently took the rifle from her. "For now." Zara collapsed against him, her body shaking. "He found me. How did he find me?" Reed held her close, stroking her hair. "It doesn't matter, he's gone and he won't come back." "You don't know him," Zara insisted, pulling back to look at Reed. "He won't give up. He'll come back with men, with the law, then we'll be ready," Reed said firmly. "Or we'll go. Wyoming, Montana, California, wherever you want. But I won't let him take you, Zara. Not ever." The fierce protectiveness in his voice seemed to calm her. Zara reached up, touching his face with wonder. "You really mean that, don't you? You'd leave everything you've built here for me?" Reed captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "This land, this cabin, they're just things. What matters is—" He hesitated, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "What matters is us, together." Tears welled in Zara's eyes, but they were different from the tears of fear she'd shed in the past. These were tears of realization, of a joy almost too intense to bear. "I love you," she whispered, the words emerging as if they surprised even her. "I didn't think I could ever love anyone again, but I love you, Reed McAllister." Reed's heart swelled painfully in his chest. He'd imagined hearing those words, had even rehearsed his response in his mind, but now that the moment was here, he found himself speechless. Instead, he lowered his mouth to hers, pouring all his unspoken emotion into the kiss. Zara responded with equal fervor, her body melting against his as if she'd finally found her true home. When they finally parted, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said roughly. "More than I knew was possible." That night, they made love for the first time, a tender, reverent exploration that healed old wounds and forged new bonds. Afterward, as Zara slept in his arms, Reed lay awake, planning their next move. Thomas Grayson wasn't a man to surrender easily, and Reed wouldn't risk Zara's safety on the hope that his warning had been sufficient. In the morning, Reed proposed a solution. "We'll go to Denver," he said as they shared coffee by the early light. "I have a friend there, a lawyer named James Harrington. He helped me secure the deed to this place." "A lawyer?" Zara looked doubtful. "Thomas has lawyers, Reed. expensive ones. James is different. He specializes in helping women escape bad marriages. Reed took her hand. If anyone can legally free you from Grayson, it's him. Hope flickered in Zara's eyes. Do you really think it's possible? I do. Reed squeezed her hand. It won't be easy and it might take time, but James is good at what he does. They spent the day preparing packing essentials, arranging for a neighbor to look after the livestock, and hiding valuables in case Grayson returned in their absence. Reed was determined to keep the ranch. It represented years of hard work and was their home. But Zara's safety came first. They left at dawn the next day, riding south toward Denver. The journey would take several days, but they were both accustomed to hardship and took comfort in each other's company. At night, they camped under the stars, finding moments of joy despite the uncertainty that drove them. On the third evening, as they sat by their campfire in a sheltered grove, Reed pulled something from his saddlebag, a small wooden box that he'd carved himself. "I've been saving this," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "It's not much, but—" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small, perfect pearl set in the center. Zara gasped softly. "Reed, it was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept when I came west." He took a deep breath. "Zara, I know this isn't the right time or place, but I don't want to wait any longer. When this business with Grayson is settled, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." Reed slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "No matter what happens in Denver, know that you have my heart, completely and forever." Zara threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with a fervor that left them both breathless. That night, beneath the vast Colorado sky, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other, finding strength in their love for the challenges that lay ahead. Denver in 1880 was a city in transition, part frontier town, part emerging metropolis. Reed and Zara arrived dusty and tired, finding lodging in a modest hotel near the courthouse. The next morning, they made their way to the offices of Harrington and Associates. James Harrington proved to be everything Reed had promised: intelligent, compassionate, and determined. After hearing Zara's story, he outlined their options with frank honesty. "Divorce is difficult, especially when alleging cruelty," he explained, "but not impossible. Colorado has more progressive laws than many states." He studied Zara thoughtfully. "The challenge will be evidence. It's your word against his, and unfortunately, courts tend to favor husbands." "What about witnesses?" Reed asked. "Servants from the household, neighbors. Useful if we can find any willing to testify," Harrington agreed. "But more compelling would be documentation, doctors' reports, police records." Zara shook her head. "Thomas was careful. He never left marks where people could see, and when he did, he kept me isolated until they healed." Harrington nodded grimly. "A common tactic. However, there might be another approach." He leaned forward. "Mrs. Holloway, or rather, Mrs. Grayson, how long has it been since you left your husband?" "Nearly 4 months now." "And in that time, has he made any legitimate effort to find you?" "Contacted authorities, placed advertisements, that sort of thing," Zara considered. "Not that I'm aware of. He sent men looking for me, but privately." "Interesting." Harrington made some notes. "We might be able to argue abandonment on his part." "It's a stretch, but if we can demonstrate that he made no proper effort to locate his missing wife through legitimate channels, it suggests he wasn't concerned for your welfare." A spark of hope ignited in Zara's chest. "What do we need to do?" "For now, stay in Denver. I'll begin gathering information on Grayson, his business dealings, his reputation. I have contacts in Pueblo who can help." Harrington smiled reassuringly. This won't be quick, but I've won cases with less to work with." As they left the lawyer's office, Reed wrapped an arm around Zara's shoulders. "What do you think?" "I think," she said carefully, "that for the first time I can see a future where I'm truly free." The weeks that followed settled into a new routine. They took rooms in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Caldwell, who took an immediate liking to Zara. Reed found work at a livery stable, putting his knowledge of horses to good use, while Zara continued her artwork, finding a ready market among Denver's growing middle class. Harrington worked diligently on their case, uncovering useful information about Thomas Grayson. His business dealings, it seemed, weren't entirely above board. There were rumors of intimidation, bribery, and worse. More significantly, Harrington discovered that Grayson had indeed made no official report of his wife's disappearance, no notices in newspapers, no communications with law enforcement. "He doesn't want official attention," Harrington explained during one of their meetings. Which makes sense if his business practices wouldn't withstand scrutiny. But their hope was tempered by a sobering discovery. Grayson had hired Pinkerton detectives to find Zara. One of Harrington's contacts had intercepted this information, along with the fact that the detectives had traced them to Denver. "You need to be cautious," Harrington warned. "These men are professionals." Reed nodded grimly. "We'll be careful." Despite the looming threat, life in Denver had unexpected joys. Free from the isolation of Reed's ranch, they discovered shared interests in music, literature, and the theater. One evening, they attended a performance at the newly built Tabor Opera House. Dressed in their finest clothes, Reed uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, Zara radiant in a blue silk dress she'd purchased with her earnings. As they strolled back to their boarding house under a canopy of stars, Reed marveled at how natural it felt to be with her, how the life he'd once thought complete now seemed empty without her in it. "You miss the ranch?" Zara asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Parts of it," Reed admitted. "The quiet, the open space." He squeezed her hand. "But home isn't just a place anymore." Zara leaned against him, savoring the moment. "When this is over, where would you like to live?" "Here in Denver, back at the ranch, wherever you'll be happiest," Reed answered honestly. "I loved our life at the ranch," Zara said softly. "But I'm enjoying the city too. Perhaps we could have both. Winters in Denver, the rest of the year at Elkhorn Ridge." Reed smiled at the thought. "Mrs. Caldwell mentioned that the house next door might be for sale." "It's small, but it would be ours when we're in the city." They walked on, building dreams together, dreams that seemed increasingly possible as Harrington's case against Grayson grew stronger. Then, on a bright May morning, everything changed. Reed was at work when a boy from the boarding house came running into the livery, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. McAllister, you got to come quick. There's men at the house and they've taken Miss Zara." Reed's blood ran cold. "What men? What happened?" "Two fellas in suits. Said they was the law, showed papers to Mrs. Caldwell. Said Miss Zara had to go with them. She was crying, but they made her go." Reed was already moving, saddling the fastest horse in the stable. "Which way did they go?" "Toward the courthouse, I think. One of 'em said something about a judge." Reed tossed the boy a coin. "Run to Harrington's office. Tell him what's happened. Tell him to meet me at the courthouse." The boy nodded and darted away as Reed mounted up, urging the horse into a gallop through Denver's crowded streets. At the courthouse, Reed pushed through the doors, his eyes scanning the crowded hallway frantically. A court clerk, startled by his disheveled appearance, attempted to block his path. "Sir, you can't just—" "Where are they holding the Grayson hearing?" Reed demanded. The clerk blinked in surprise. "Judge Patterson's chambers, but it's a closed proceeding." Reed brushed past him, taking the stairs two at a time. At the end of the upstairs hallway, he spotted two men in suits standing guard outside an ornate door. Beyond them, he could hear raised voices. As Reed approached, the guards moved to intercept him. "This is a private hearing, sir. You'll need to wait outside." Reed's hand moved to his belt, where his revolver should have been, but he'd left it at the boarding house, unwilling to risk carrying it in the city. Frustration and fear made his voice a growl. "My fiancée is in there. I need to see her." The guards exchanged glances. "No one goes in until the judge says so." Reed was calculating his odds of overpowering both men when the courthouse doors burst open below, and James Harrington rushed in, accompanied by the sheriff. "McAllister," Harrington called, hurrying up the stairs. "Wait!" The lawyer reached Reed's side, slightly out of breath. "Let me handle this." He turned to the guards. "Gentlemen, I'm James Harrington, attorney for Mrs. Zara Grayson. This proceeding was scheduled without my knowledge, which constitutes a serious breach of legal protocol." The sheriff, a grizzled man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward. "I'm Sheriff Burke. Open the door." Reluctantly, one of the guards complied. The scene inside Judge Patterson's chambers made Reed's blood boil. Zara sat rigid in a chair, tears streaming down her face, while Thomas Grayson stood nearby with a satisfied smirk. A thin, nervous-looking man who could only be Grayson's lawyer hovered at his elbow. Judge Patterson, a stern-faced man in his 60s, looked up with evident annoyance at the interruption. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrington stepped forward, every inch the professional despite the unusual circumstances. "Your Honor, I apologize for the disruption, but I must formally protest these proceedings. I am the attorney of record for Mrs. Grayson, yet I received no notification of this hearing." Grayson's lawyer interjected smoothly. "Your Honor, this isn't a formal hearing. Mr. Grayson simply requested your assistance in a private family matter, the return of his mentally unstable wife to his care." "Mentally unstable?" Reed couldn't contain himself. "That's a damned lie, Mr. McAllister," Harrington warned quietly before addressing the judge again. "Your Honor, Mr. Grayson's claims are fraudulent. We have filed a petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, which is currently being processed through the proper channels." Judge Patterson's gaze sharpened. "Is this true, Mr. Williams?" he asked Grayson's lawyer. Williams cleared his throat. "We were unaware of any such petition, Your Honor." "Because you deliberately avoided service," Harrington countered. "My clerks have attempted to deliver the papers to Mr. Grayson multiple times." Throughout this exchange, Zara's eyes had remained fixed on Reed, drawing strength from his presence. Now she rose, her voice steady despite her tear-streaked face. "Your Honor, I am not mentally unstable. I fled my husband's home in fear for my life after years of abuse. I have been living peacefully and productively in Denver, and I have no wish to return to Pueblo with Mr. Grayson." Judge Patterson studied her thoughtfully. "Mr. Grayson claims you stole valuable items when you left. Is this true?" "No, Your Honor. I took only my personal belongings and a small amount of money for travel expenses." The judge turned to Sheriff Burke. "Sheriff, what's your assessment of this situation?" Burke, who had been observing silently, stepped forward. "Your Honor, I received information this morning about Mr. Grayson's men forcing Mrs. Grayson from her boarding house without proper legal documentation. That's why I accompanied Mr. Harrington here." He fixed Grayson with a hard stare. "I'm also aware that Mr. Grayson has hired private detectives rather than utilizing official channels to locate his supposedly missing wife." Judge Patterson's expression grew increasingly displeased as he turned back to Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, did you bring your wife here under false pretenses?" Thomas Grayson maintained his composure, though his eyes flashed with anger. "Your Honor, I merely wish to resolve a private matter with minimal scandal. My wife has been confused since a riding accident last year. I've been concerned for her welfare." "That's another lie," Zara said firmly. "I've never had a riding accident. I can provide witnesses who saw the results of his beatings." The judge's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Enough. This is precisely why we have legal procedures, Mr. Grayson. If your wife has filed for divorce, that petition must proceed through proper channels." He rose from his desk. "Mrs. Grayson, you are free to go. Mr. Grayson, I suggest you direct your concerns through the court in the appropriate manner." Relief washed over Zara's face as she moved quickly to Reed's side. He wrapped an arm protectively around her shoulders, glaring at Grayson over her head. Thomas Grayson's mask of civility slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "This isn't over," he snarled. "She's still my wife, and I'll have what's mine." Sheriff Burke stepped between them. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Grayson. I'd advise against making any more of those in my jurisdiction." As they left the courthouse, Zara trembled against Reed's side. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Not ever." Reed tightened his hold on her. "We'll handle it, together." Harrington accompanied them back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Caldwell fussed over Zara, apologizing repeatedly for allowing the men to take her. "They had papers, dear. They said they were from the court." "I didn't know. It's not your fault," Zara assured her. "They fooled the judge too at first." Once they were alone in their room, Reed held Zara close, feeling her gradually relax in his arms. "You were so brave in there," he murmured into her hair. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But then I saw you and I knew I could stand my ground." Reed kissed her gently. "Harrington thinks the divorce petition will go through now." The judge seemed sympathetic. "But until then, I'm still legally Thomas's wife," Zara said, the fear creeping back into her voice. He could try again. Reed's jaw tightened. "We'll increase our precautions. You won't go anywhere alone, and I'll speak to Sheriff Burke about keeping an eye on Grayson while he's in Denver." But Zara had grown quiet, her expression thoughtful. "Reed," she said finally, "what if we don't wait? For the divorce, I mean." "What are you saying, California?" she said, a new determination in her voice. "Harrington mentioned that in California, if a wife has been abandoned, she can establish residency and file for divorce there. The courts are more sympathetic to women." Reed considered this. "It would mean leaving everything here, starting over again." "I know it's asking a lot," Zara acknowledged, "but Thomas has influence in Colorado. In California, he'd have no advantage." Reed cupped her face in his hands. "Zara, listen to me. I'd go to the ends of the earth if it meant you'd be safe and happy. California, Oregon, Alaska, it doesn't matter, as long as we're together." Tears welled in Zara's eyes, not tears of fear or sadness, but of overwhelming love. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "To find you when I had nothing left." Reed smiled, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "I'm the lucky one. You brought life back to a man who'd forgotten how to live." They made their plans quickly. Harrington, though disappointed to lose the case, agreed that California offered their best chance for a clean break. He provided letters of introduction to a colleague in San Francisco and advice on establishing residency. Reed sold his share in a mining claim he'd retained from his prospecting days, giving them enough money for the journey and to establish themselves. The hardest decision was what to do about the ranch. "I can't bear the thought of Thomas getting it," Reed admitted as they discussed their options. "What about your neighbor, the one who's looking after the place now?" Zara suggested. "Could he buy it?" Reed considered this. "Sam Thompson has always admired the property. He might be interested, but he wouldn't have the cash up front." "We could arrange terms," Zara said. A small payment now, the rest over time, and with the understanding that if we ever return to Colorado, we'd have first right to buy it back, Reed finished, warming to the idea. That could work. With their decision made, they moved quickly. Reed rode to Elkhorn to arrange the sale to Thompson, returning with a modest down payment and a contract for the balance. Meanwhile, Zara prepared for their journey, purchasing supplies and selling the furniture they couldn't take. News of their impending departure spread quickly through their small circle in Denver. Mrs. Caldwell hosted a farewell dinner, and several of Zara's clients commissioned last-minute artworks as keepsakes. The evening before their departure, as they packed the last of their belongings, a knock came at their door. Reed answered cautiously, relaxing when he saw Sheriff Burke. "Evening, McAllister," Burke said, removing his hat. "Madam, thought you should know Grayson left Denver this morning. Headed back to Pueblo, according to my sources." Relief washed over Zara's face. "Thank you for telling us," Burke nodded. "Word is he was in a foul mood, said some things that concern me." He fixed Reed with a serious look. "Watch your backs on the journey west." "I wouldn't put it past him to have men waiting along the route." Reed extended his hand. "We appreciate the warning and everything else you've done." After Burke left, Zara turned to Reed, worry clouding her eyes. "Do you think he's right about Thomas having men watching for us?" Reed considered this carefully. "It's possible, but we'll be taking the train as far as we can, then joining a wagon train for the remainder. Safety in numbers." Zara nodded, trying to set aside her fears. "One more day and we'll be on our way to a new life." The journey west was long but uneventful. They took the train to Cheyenne, then joined a wagon train bound for California. The weeks on the trail were challenging but brought them closer than ever. Zara proved remarkably adaptable to the rigors of frontier travel, winning the respect of their fellow travelers with her resilience and willingness to help others. Reed found himself constantly amazed by her strength, her kindness, and the depth of her artistic talent. She filled a small sketchbook with drawings of their journey: majestic mountain ranges, vast plains, their companions around campfires, and intimate moments of their evolving life together. By the time they reached San Francisco in late summer, they had grown accustomed to the rhythms of a shared life. The city, with its hills and fog and bustling activity, was unlike anything either of them had experienced, but they embraced its energy and possibilities. With Harrington's colleagues' help, they found a small house on the city's outskirts, modest but comfortable, with a view of the bay. Reed secured work at the shipyards, while Zara's artwork quickly found a market among the city's wealthy merchants and their wives. They established residency, and 6 months later, Zara filed for divorce. The California courts, as promised, were more sympathetic to her situation. When Thomas Grayson failed to appear for the proceedings, likely unwilling to travel so far for what he considered a lost cause, the divorce was granted with surprising ease. On a bright spring morning in 1881, Reed and Zara stood before a judge in San Francisco's courthouse, not for a divorce this time, but for a wedding. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Harrington's colleague and his wife serving as witnesses. As Reed slipped a new gold band alongside his mother's pearl ring on Zara's finger, he felt a sense of completion that he'd never thought possible. "I, Reed Thomas McAllister, take you, Zara Elizabeth Holloway, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion welling in his chest. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Zara's eyes shone with tears as she repeated the vows, her hand trembling slightly in his. "By the power vested in me by the state of California," the judge proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Reed drew Zara into his arms, sealing their union with a kiss that promised forever. Their life in San Francisco flourished. Reed's shipyard work led to an opportunity with a shipping company, where his integrity and work ethic quickly earned him respect and advancement. Zara's artistic reputation grew, her paintings and sketches becoming sought after by San Francisco's elite. They never forgot the ranch in Colorado, maintaining correspondence with Sam Thompson, who gradually paid off the property as agreed. 3 years after leaving, they received his final payment, along with unexpected news. Thomas Grayson had died in a confrontation with a business rival, the violent end a fitting conclusion to a violent life. The news brought Zara a complex mixture of emotions: relief, sadness for the man Thomas might have been, and finally, a sense of true freedom. "We could go back now," Reed said as they sat on their small porch, watching the sunset paint the bay in gold and crimson. "If you wanted to." Zara considered this, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "I think I'd like that. Not right away, but someday. Our children should know the ranch, the wide open spaces where their father found his peace." Reed placed his hand over hers, feeling the quickening of new life beneath their joined fingers. "Wherever we go, we'll go together. That's the only thing that matters." Zara leaned against his shoulder, contentment in every line of her body. "When I knocked on your door that winter night, wearing nothing but rags and carrying nothing but fear, I never imagined where that moment would lead us." Reed smiled, remembering the frightened woman he'd found huddled in his cabin. "When I handed you that bedroom key, I was just offering shelter from a storm. I had no idea I was starting a new life for both of us." "The best kind of life," Zara murmured, turning her face up for his kiss. "One built on love, trust, and the courage to begin again." As twilight deepened around them, Reed and Zara McAllister held each other close, grateful for the long and winding path that had brought them together, from a desperate knock on a lonely cabin door to the shared journey that stretched endlessly before them, filled with promise and possibility. 5 years later, Reed and Zara stood on the porch of their rebuilt ranch house at Elkhorn Ridge, watching their 3-year-old son and infant daughter play in the yard under the watchful eye of Mrs. Thompson, their neighbor's wife. The return to Colorado had been easier than they'd anticipated, the land welcoming them back like old friends. They'd bought back the ranch from Sam Thompson, who'd been happy to sell it to them while keeping his own adjacent property. The old cabin still stood, preserved as a reminder of their beginnings, but they'd built a proper home nearby, spacious and bright, with large windows to showcase the magnificent views and plenty of room for their growing family. Reed had used his shipping company earnings and Zara's art proceeds to expand the ranch, adding more cattle and horses. They'd even planted an orchard that was just beginning to bear fruit. "You ever regret it?" Reed asked, his arm around Zara's waist. "Leaving San Francisco for this?" Zara smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Never. San Francisco was wonderful, but this—" She gestured to the land spreading out before them, the distant mountains, their children playing in the golden afternoon light. "This is home." Reed kissed the top of her head, marveling at how life had come full circle. The lonely man who had once been content with solitude now found his greatest joy in the family that surrounded him, in the love that had begun on a winter night when a desperate woman in rags had knocked on his door. "I love you, Mrs. McAllister," he murmured. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." Zara turned in his arms, her eyes still that remarkable green that had captivated him from the start, filled with the same love that warmed his heart. "And I love you, Mr. McAllister." for giving me shelter when I had none, for handing me a key when all I had were rags, and for building this beautiful life with me, one day at a time. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the tenderness of their beginnings and all the promise of their future, a future built on the foundation of that first desperate knock, that first act of kindness, and the love that had transformed them both.